It is the Beaver Banter Podcast. My name is CJ Baumgartner. Ian Rivers, my co-host, and Ian. Another great week to be a Beaver. We dive into some stuff here as we'll just get right out in front of it. We're not going to have a show next week, so we are going to try and burn the candle at both ends. We're going to talk a little bit about this weekend, about the last weekend's matches, about this weekend's current games, and even a little bit of the weekend after. But why don't we talk first of all? How are you?
I'm great. Over the last week, the Chargers have hired Jim Harbaugh. They have hired everything's going great. In terms of that, it's been a great offseason as far as it can so far. So we're on a very positive note. If Jim Harbaugh cannot make the Chargers into some sort of relevant franchise, then God himself needs to come down and do something about it, because there's nobody else, I don't think, that is going to be able to figure that out if it can't be Harbaugh.
Well, it's interesting because Harbaugh is working in the NFL for the first time without Bemidji State alum Trent Baalke running the show. That's your BSU wrinkle. It's all it comes back.
Well, and Baalke.
Don't look at why those two separated in San Francisco. By the way,
they kind of butt heads a little bit, and the ownership chose Baalke over Harbaugh, and now Baalke is in Jacksonville still, I believe. So
yep,
neither of those two ended up, sticking around.
San Francisco, and it appeared San Francisco probably made the right choice.
They might have some good stuff going on right now, but
just maybe.
We've got a Beaver Banter birthday. So how's that going? We're recording this Tuesday. You probably won't hear it Tuesday, but as of the recording, CJ is turning a year older.
Yeah, closer to 30 than 20, which is weird. I will admit, being 26, it's kind of that, it's that joke of when you're like 16 years old and like, 16th birthday, get my driver's license, and your 18th birthday, like I can vote. And then you get your 21st birthday and you're like, I can go to a bar, I can drink alcohol. And then you get to your 22nd birthday and you're like, my time on this earth is fleeting. I am but sand in an hourglass.
Yes.
And that's how it feels. And of course, when you're in like the adult world, you tell everybody you feel old and they go, oh, you're just young, which in the grand scheme of things, of course, but I've literally never been older. So I have no idea what to compare it to. So couldn't spend a birthday better than talking about Bemidji State athletics. So let's dive right in. And the women's basketball team had a weekend that they want to forget, especially when you look at Friday night's game. Ian, just what was the score of that one? What happened there?
Friday night was pretty ugly. It was a 44-point loss. The Beavers only put up 30 points. It was 30-74 at the hands, or I should say at the paws of the Concordia St. Paul Golden Bears. So it's just, this team is less talented than a lot of teams in this conference, and it's starting to show. The back end of the season is coming up, and there's a human emotion that's truly attached to losing. I guarantee it. Ask almost any team. It's a lot easier to motivate yourself to go out there and put in your best effort when you are 0-0 in the first week of the season than it is, when you start falling to 3-15 now on the season with 0 wins in the conference. So I'm sure maybe some of that crept in. But yeah, Concordia St. Paul is a pretty good team in general. 13-5 on the season now. So yeah, it was just ugly. BSU shot 21% from the field, 12 of 55. They did get better offensively all day. 4 points in the first quarter, 6 in the second, 8 in the third, and 12 in the fourth. So take that with what you will. But not a great showing in that game. And it didn't get a ton better against Duluth on Saturday, as they lost by 20. So they did cut that deficit in half, but still a 20-point loss, 51-71 to Duluth. Still winless in the NSIC season. And now you get into kind of a chaotic schedule for the next 2 weeks. It's a good week for us because we'll both be kind of unavailable the same week. So it worked out that we don't have to like solo host the show or, book some guests up. But it's chaotic. We've got a Thursday game on February 1st. So that's coming up here just later this week against Minot State. Then you have a Saturday game against MSU Moorhead. And then you have a game next Tuesday against Northern State, and then a game next Thursday against Minnesota Crookston before you have like 8 days off before the next weekend. So, yeah, it's going to be games coming fast and loose here. You got about 2 days in between every one of them. So, we'll see if they can do anything of importance over those next couple of weeks. And we will report back with hopefully some good news on women's basketball when we return.
Well, yeah, and we're starting to get to that point in the NSIC portion of the schedule where you're starting to get the rematches with teams. Whatever teams you're going to play a second time, it's kind of rotated back through. And now we start to get to see, how does this team do? They lost by 12 the first time against Minot State. How do they respond? And especially, like you said, with the weird week of playing on Thursday and then Saturday and then a Tuesday game and then a Thursday game, it's really just kind of a weird couple weeks, and maybe that's a good thing. Kind of gets you out of your rhythm and gets you doing a little bit of different stuff. But that's the way the schedule looks like for the women's. Flipping over to the men's side, Ian, it didn't get much better. And this is definitely a low point in the season for men's basketball. They just, not only have they been losing games, but it feels like every time, you check the score in the second half and all of a sudden they're down by 20, and they just haven't gotten off to great starts. They've gotten behind, and then they haven't been able to really fight their way back into some of these games. And I know that it's more than that. That's just a surface level observation, but it's a pretty low point in the season for men's basketball. Now they've lost 4 in a row after 2 lackluster performances over the weekend.
Yeah, 4 in a row, and that's it was a little bit surprising, with what we saw on the schedule. It wasn't like you're playing these juggernaut teams. Augustana and Wayne State are both good. They were both tournament teams. You played them both in the tournament last year, and you beat them both in the tournament last year. And you really just didn't look good at home, where we only had 1 loss, and it was an overtime loss to the number 2 team in the country. And you just get boat raced. And now you come out this week and you're on the road. You're playing Concordia St. Paul, who is, again, really not having that good of a season. And, whether or not whatever happened in that game, it just, you got down and you couldn't push back into the game, in the second half. So it's tough because now they are, like you said, on a 4-game losing streak. But I don't know, where do you go from here is really my question.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting. I mean, you look at even Friday night's game in Concordia down in St. Paul, Bemidji State shot 50% from the field. They shot 40% from 3. They were able to get their shots up. They didn't really necessarily turn the ball over too much. But when you give up 92 points, it doesn't really matter how well you do on the offensive side of the ball. And you basically had to be perfect on offense, and you had a very good night on the offensive side of the board and on the offensive side of the floor. And, it's going to happen. And I think we've kind of seen that over these last few weeks. It's been, you give up 90 points to Minnesota Duluth. You give up 92 points to Concordia. You give up 82 points to Wayne State. You give up 98 points to Augustana. And really,
before that, 94 to Minnesota State.
Right. And granted, that one went to overtime, and that's the number 2 team in the country. But also, you're right. Like
in regulation, though. So
exactly. And this team just hasn't played since the start of the new year. This team has been pretty bad defensively, and I think that's been starting to show. And this team can score. There's been a few clunkers here and there throughout the last month, like the 55-point showing at home against Wayne State. But you've been able to score 71 points, 84 points, 77 points. Typically, that's enough to win you some basketball games as long as you can play some good defense. And they just haven't been able to do that. And it's put more pressure on their offense. And I mean, I'm sure there's more things schematically and technically you could talk into it, but overall, the defense just hasn't been good.
Yeah, that's one thing I was going to bring up here is I noticed that over the last 6 games, you've given up 94. You had that 58 in there against Winona State, but almost everything is back over 80 and most of them over 90 points. And so you're looking at the defensive stats. BSU's a middle of the road offense. They're a top 6 offense in the conference. And you look at the defensive statistics and they give up 74.7 points per game, which is best or good for 11th best in the conference, which really is not very good. When you look at it, they are 9th in terms of point margin. And that probably due a lot to that win over Winona State a couple weeks ago that you won by 35 points or whatever it was. So, yeah, defensively, you hope you can kind of tidy it up because this has been a rough stretch here. And, if you're looking at it from a positive note, they did go on a 4-game losing streak last year, albeit a much more opportune time to do that, like right at the beginning of the season. But then coming out of that, they won 7 of 8 games, went 7-1 over that stretch, and really turned their season around. Last year they went 20-11. They're 10-10 right now, so they're kind of behind the 8 ball of where we expected them to be. And their next 2 games are against ranked opponents. It's number 19 Minot State on the road, who granted you've beaten this year, but they're still a ranked opponent, and they have not slowed down since that game. They're in 3rd in the conference, 16-4 overall, 11-3 in the NSIC. And then, after that, it's the number 12 team in the country, MSU Moorhead. They must have lost some games recently. They're 17-3. They're slipping down just a bit, but they're still a very, very good team. But you get them at home. So, again, a team that you beat earlier in the season. Now you're on the road. You're reeling. You need a win. Thursday night, 7 p.m. in Minot. And then you come back home on Saturday. It's a team that you played pretty well earlier this season, a team that you beat last season at one point, and that you damn near beat again in the tournament. And we've talked about that game quite a bit. But you've got a chance. Like, I'm not going to sit here and say that this team is down and out. We've seen them play well at stretches this year. But, if the defense doesn't get itself turned around, this could be a rough end of the season. I don't think they'll, miss the playoffs. Now, they only have a 2-game buffer over St. Cloud State for that last playoff spot, though. So, we'll see. If it stays like this, you might have to watch out for it. But right now, sitting in 9th in the conference, outside of that bubble where you want to get a home playoff game in the first round of the NSIC tournament. But we'll see if they can make any noise this weekend. Like we said, we'll have a 4-game break that we'll get to come back and break down after that, because you get Northern State and Minnesota Crookston following those 2 games. So if you can even split this weekend, as it's Thursday, Saturday, if you can even split and come into that, Crookston 6-14 on the season, 3-11 in the conference. Northern State, they kind of bullied you the last time you played them, but they're 7-13, 5-9 in the conference. So If you can take one of those 2 games and then come and beat up on Northern State and Minnesota Crookston next week, go 3-1 in this next stretch, you're back to 500 in the NSIC. And I think you're back in the driver's seat to be able to kind of control your own destiny coming down the stretch, because there's only 8 games left in the regular season.
It's creeping up.
Yeah, we got to start making some headway here. So you got to hope one of these games against Minot or Moorhead goes your way.
Yeah, and you mentioned it. There's still plenty of hope for them to get back in and get there. They're not going to get that first round bye, but can they get a first round home game to try and get to the Pentagon? They're not going to get the bye directly into South Dakota, but can they get a home playoff game and have an opportunity to get in there? And that's what they were able to do last year. Once you get in, and you got to be playing your best basketball, they have a chance to do that. But like you said, this week is not an opportune time for them to try and get right. They got to go on the road to Minot State. They got to play MSU Moorhead. Which team would you rather, I guess this is the question. If you're Bemidji State, which team would you rather play again? Or which team do you think they would feel more confident playing again that second time? Minot State on the road, who they beat before and isn't ranked as high, or MSU Moorhead, who's scuffling a little bit, and you get to host them on your home floor, and you were right there with them the first time?
Yeah, I think confidence might be a factor in this game, just because you've lost 4 straight. And hopefully that Boshi can get these guys up for this game, knowing that they kind of need it to get their season back on track, because at this point we still think that we're a decent enough team. We do not think that this team is going to be. Yeah, we don't think that this team is going to be in jeopardy of missing the playoffs. So you still have to be like, hey, let's not make the goal just to get in. Let's get that home playoff game again. You're 4 games back of Duluth, and I don't see them falling off too hard. So yeah, I think at this point, with the 4-game losing streak, that bye into the Pentagon is out of the question. But yeah, get these guys up. You got to get one of these games if you want to really stay in contention, because if you don't, you got 6 games left, and you probably need to win 4 or 5 of them to get that home playoff game if you can't steal one of these against Minot State or MSU Moorhead.
Yeah, I feel like if I'm Bemidji State, I feel like maybe I'm crazy. And this is just kind of off a gut level volition. I feel like playing MSU Moorhead the second time is maybe a little more advantageous because they're scuffling and you get them on your home floor and you knew that you could run with them last time versus a Minot State team that's feeling it's the inverse. The Minot State's playing good basketball right now. Bemidji State's scuffling a little bit and Minot State gets BSU on their home floor for the Beaver Bash, Beaver Battle. Beaver Battle? Is that we're gonna do this every time? Beaver Battle?
Yeah, Beaver Battle.
Because battle sounds cooler. That's right. So officially rebranded. You can thank Beaver Banter Sports. You can thank the Beaver Banter podcast for that sports update.
Yeah, and I think are we still undefeated against other than no, women's basketball's lost to Minot State this year. So no longer undefeated against Minot State on the season.
Count football, women's soccer did it
Football,
twice.
Women's soccer did it 3 times because they did it non-conference.
They played non-conference, yes.
And then did they play? They played in the NSIC tournament too.
Yeah,
I can't remember if they did or not. But volleyball did it twice. So I think the only people that have lost to Minot State are women's basketball so far. Yeah, you're talking about reeling right now for MSU Moorhead. They've lost 3 of their last 5. They lost to Sioux Falls. They come home and beat Duluth and Concordia St. Paul. And then they lost to Winona State University and they lost to Minnesota State Mankato by 3. So that's they've lost 3 of their last 5. Maybe they're a little bit reeling as well. So let's see what the Beavers can pick up.
I will correct the record. Bemidji State beat Minot State 2 times in women's soccer this year.
Well, and they didn't play them in football.
Right.
They did not play the football game this year. I remember that. So
because they were
the realignment 4-0 after the fall season and
4-0, and then they got a 5-5 or
so
5-1.
5-1 on the season. So
I'll take it.
Yeah, we'll see how the spring sports go, but we could really use some wins this weekend from men's and women's basketball to keep that record on the up and up.
We've been winning the Beaver battles. We need to win the Beaver wars. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Exactly. So, yeah, I feel like that game against MSUM might be more advantageous, but now that I say it, I've put the old broadcasters jinx on it and they're done for. So, I apologize to Coach
we are
Bushy
cooked.
and company. I need to put on a brave face. It's over.
It's Lamover.
So moving things over to women's hockey, that's the big positive for the week is they had an opportune advantage against St. Thomas to get some wins back on their board, and they're able to do that and get back in the win column, not just once, but twice.
Yeah, absolutely. They were able to actually, no, they tied on
right.
Friday. Sorry. They tied and lost the shootout, so dropped a couple points there, but still a very good showing for the weekend because they picked up a 4-2 win on Saturday. If we look at Friday, the Beavers got out to a 1-goal lead, courtesy of Kayla Santel in the second period, and then later on that period, St. Thomas answered on the power play. And then in the third period, St. Thomas took a 2-1 lead again on the power play. So what do we talk about last week with the game against Minnesota where BSU played pretty well was, man, the only thing that hurt them was they couldn't stay out of the penalty box, giving up 2 power play goals again in this game. But McKenna Deering, the hero, with 1 minute and 25 seconds left in the game, tied the game and sent it to overtime. So if anything, you could say that they stole a point, but yeah, lost in the shootout. So it counts as a tie and you win the season series after Saturday's 4-2 win, 2-1-1 against St. Thomas, which, it wasn't a sweep, but we'll take it. You got 4 points on the weekend. You jump into 7th place as I look for the box score for Saturday's game so we can give some goal scorers some credit. First goal by Taylor Nelson, second goal by Alyssa Watkins, third goal also by Alyssa Watkins, which would end up being the game-winning goal with about 15 minutes left in the game, and an empty netter added by Kayla Santel. So, yeah, I think a good showing. You had a team that you want to prove that you're better than, and you got your second opportunity this season, and you took it, and now you're in 7th place in the WCHA, and Mankato was able to steal 1 point off of somebody this weekend. They are now at 13 instead of 12. So we're 3 points behind Minnesota State with, again, 8 games to go. You have 4 series left. Some of them don't seem too plausible to win. We'll touch on those in a second here. But CJ, what did you think about the hockey performance this weekend against St. Thomas?
Well, I think one of the big things that we talked about last week was, they're starting to play better and they kind of turned that corner. I mean, I know the second game against Duluth wasn't necessarily one to write home about, but you were playing top 10 teams in the country and you were losing, but it was like 0-2, it was 1-3, it was 0-2, but they'd only scored 1 goal in almost an entire calendar month, and for sure over a 30-day period before they scored on January 20th against Minnesota at the Sanford Center, 1 goal in that game. They didn't score since December 29th. So it was a bit of a drought for them where they scored 3 in a 3-1 win over Robert Morris. So it was, can they get back into the goal scoring? And they were able to put up 6 goals in 2 games. And that's something, I know that the competition in St. Thomas is a lot lower quality wise than the teams that they played for most of January, but that was the thing is, okay, you're playing a little bit better. Are we going to see that goal scoring start to kind of follow along with it once you play teams that are a little bit closer to your level? And they were able to do that. So I think the fact that the goal scoring was able to get going in that weekend was definitely a positive sign. Now, things get a little bit tough over the next couple series, not going to lie. So I'm not going to say that the offense is a juggernaut, but I think overall, is BSU women's hockey turning a corner? And I would say that they are. They're playing their best hockey towards the later part of the season.
They absolutely are turning a corner. And, like you said, the competition is so tough in this conference that, now you've got Ohio State, number 1 in the country. You're on the road. The last series did not go well. You lost 1-9 and 0-5. So that's going to be tough. If you can come out of there with a result that's any better than either of those games, you're going to be looking at, hey, cool. We only lost 1-4, or, you hold them under 4 games or 4 goals in a game. You're feeling pretty good about it, because as much as they are turning a corner, they're still not at the level of Ohio State. And then after that, they get Wisconsin, who is number 2 in the conference. And I'm not sure what they're ranked nationally, but those games will at least be at home. But again, over this next 4-game stretch, which we will not be here to talk about, I don't know. You probably are not realistically even going to be able to steal a point out of these games. But if you can, that's awesome. I mean, 1 point
Right.
literally would be great, because we have not taken points off of. I don't think we have taken any points off of Ohio State, Wisconsin, or Minnesota over the past 2 seasons. So I would be happy with that. I mean, I don't think you could be you could not be very disappointed. I'm trying to pull up last year's schedule just to see the record comparison between this year's and last year's team, but it's making me kind of stutter here. But yeah,
last year in the second half of the season, it was different.
Yeah. Last year they won 5 games. This year they've got 4 wins. It doesn't look quite as good on paper. It looks about the same, but you can tell with the results and the way the team is playing that they're starting to turn a corner. The culture's there. The goaltending seems to be there. If they can put a few more talented pieces around that goaltender, then you might be talking about a team that can challenge for, one of the 4 or 5 seeds like we were seeing back in 2016-17 when we were on, R&B Sports Talk talking about it. They were in the middle of the conference back then. It was still struggling to pick up a bunch of points against the Ohio States, but it was almost once a season. You'd win a game, you'd steal a game against one of those teams.
You could beat a Wisconsin. You could go to Columbus and win. And that was something that they were able to do back when we had the R&B Sports Tech program. They were constantly getting to the frozen face-off. They were doing some of that.
They took a game off of Minnesota even one year in the playoffs. Yeah. They forced it to 3 games. It was either Minnesota or Wisconsin. One of those.
I think it was Minnesota. Yeah, I think I'd have to look again. But you're right. Like they they were feisty, I think maybe is the best word. Like, we knew that they were never like realistically going to be winning the WCHA, but were they going to be like, were they going to knock somebody off and go, whoa, well, this completely shakes up the entire playoff picture? And they were totally able to do that. And this, I don't know what the ceiling is for this current group as constructed, but they're on their way to becoming something of their own. And they're on their way to getting consistent hockey out there. And I'm seeing the face you're making, Ian. What'd you find?
I just went to look at Minnesota State's schedule for the rest of the season, and it's considerably easier than where Bemidji State currently sits. They have Minnesota, Duluth, and Ohio State their next 2 weekends, so a pretty similar schedule to what Bemidji will see. But then they have Bemidji State and St. Thomas, a home and home to end the season. So you really are going to need, if you want to, and here's why I'm bringing this up, is because I think that getting sixth place would be like super awesome. Minnesota by far has been the easiest team of the top three for Bemidji State to play this season. So if you can get them in the playoffs, you might not win that series, but you probably have a better chance of taking a game, somehow off of that team. But it looks like to have any chance of that, you're going to need to maybe steal, like I said, God forbid, anything you can from these next 2 series. And then you're going to have to sweep Mankato and hope that St. Thomas can take some points off of them. But, we'll touch on that since it's still a couple weeks away. We'll touch on that when we get back from our little break here over the next week. But yeah, it's going to be a tough slope for Bemidji State these next couple of games. So again, maybe don't look for any points, maybe don't look for any wins, but look for improvement from those first 2 series of the year against Wisconsin and Ohio State.
Right. And, going on the road to Columbus is never easy. I know that they're hosting Wisconsin at the Sanford Center, but still, yeah, you're right. Like, can they make Ohio State and or Wisconsin sweat out at least one of the games each weekend, where all of a sudden they're like, whoa, we kind of weirdly barely got out of there with all 6 points. Like, can you do that to them? And I think that's a good bellwether for a series where you got to go down to Mankato and then finish out the year hosting St. Cloud State, who, you played them as like your very first conference series of the year. So it's really hard to, kind of gauge what it was like back then compared to now. But yeah, I mean, can they get that 6th spot? Who knows? But I think the fact that, it's like you said, just the vibes of this team are completely different than they were a year ago. A year ago at this time, it was like they weren't great. And it kind of didn't really know, like, where do we go from here? And, what's the direction? And now there is a direction. There is like a vibe. There's a momentum of that program. And I know vibes and momentum, they don't translate into wins, but they're a part of it. They're not the sole driver, but they are a part of it. And I think the way that this team is going, it's a positive one. And like you said, the goaltending is there. They have some pieces. And if they can get that going, they can at least have a nice little team for the next few years. But looking up for the rest of the show, let's talk a little bit about men's hockey. They did not play last weekend, and they head back to the Sanford Center, and they are getting ready to play against Augustana, technically a conference opponent, but also technically not a conference opponent because they're not getting any points. Ian, what do you think of the series against Augie, a team that's taken down some top teams in the country over the year?
Yeah, Augustana has struggled recently. They lost to Arizona State. They split with Arizona State a couple weeks ago. Last weekend, swept by Ferris State. So they've not been as good, but yeah, they have a solid roster in place. I think that they're a decent team, and I think that I'm probably gonna have to predict a split this weekend, and that's because of the fact that just about an hour before we started this recording, Mr. Jared Roboto of the Bemidji Pioneer,
Oh yeah, I saw that.
He tweeted out that BSU will be without Kyle Loft, Tony Fulmer, and Will Magnuson. So that's over 300 games of experience on the defensive core this weekend. Lord knows what happened to Fulmer. Magnuson, he might have picked up an injury against Michigan Tech, but Fulmer for sure finished the game. We have inside sources that say that. on Saturday against Michigan Tech last 2 weekends ago. So, but the good news is that Jackson Jutting will be back for the Augustana games. So, really, again, it's kind of similar to the St. Cloud series. You still want to win these games. Like, God forbid, the last thing I want is for BSU to actually like make the NCAA tournament and to be like 14, 20-3 or something like that. Like,
Right.
just, so win these games.
At
Get a
some
sweep,
point, like a
get
good
yourself
hockey
feeling
team
good.
should be able to win some hockey games.
Right. So get that non-conference record up a little bit, even though it's not technically a non-conference game, but it is because it's not for points, get that up. You're 9-14-1 right now. Let's make that a little bit more respectable. Get to double-digit wins, even with a little bit of a lackluster defensive core there. Eric Polkamp, he put the USA on his shoulders. He can do it for BSU, and hopefully they stay healthy because, yeah, those guys are missing for this weekend, but I think that's fine. If they were in jeopardy of like, oh, we don't want to make you play through this injury, and then you aggravate it, and now you're done until the playoffs, and we are missing 2 massive defenders, I'd rather have them take the rest this weekend if they truly need it and get them back for that stretch, coming down the back stretch of the season here. But yeah, Augustana is a pretty solid team. They're right around where BSU. I actually think as of right now today, both teams are tied at 40th in the pairwise or 41st or wherever it is. So very similar teams this year. Augustana has probably some better wins than Bemidji State. I think once you rack up wins against CC and Denver, you kind of take that by default because BSU's not doing that to anybody this season. But yeah, I don't know what to expect just because of the defensive players that'll be missing, but Jutting will be back. Hopefully that helps the faceoffs. And, with Matthias Scholl in net, who needs a defender?
Right. Who needs him? Fire. He'll just be there.
Yeah, he'll be there. He can save 60 shots again,
He can do it.
Yeah. So
doesn't mean he wants to, but he can. We'll make him.
We've seen it. So, yeah, we're just going to have to outscore everybody this weekend, I think. And then, after that, we take our talents to Marquette, Michigan, to take on the Northern Michigan Wildcats. And, you're coming down the stretch in the season here. It's getting down to crunch time. You're going to need 5 or 6 points, legitimately, even on the road. Northern Michigan is not a very good team. I don't want to sit here and say, oh, well, they only have 8 wins this season. BSU only has 9. So that's not really the deciding factor. But I watched the Northern Michigan game against Minnesota State on Saturday, and they were not good. Thank God, thank them. And we'll go over it in just a second. They took 2 points off of Minnesota State this weekend. So thank you for that, because that seemed like a miracle after what I saw on Saturday. I'm like, how the hell did these guys win in overtime or the shootout or whatever? Like, they're not that good. So hopefully Bemidji can take 5 points off of them. Probably the most disappointing team in the CCHA this year, Northern Michigan. They were supposed to be one of the top dogs in the conference, and a sweep would go miles against Northern Michigan on the road because, if you don't get it, if you split with Northern Michigan, you're still like not out of home ice contention, but it kind of does put a real damper on your ability to win the conference because BSU got some help this last weekend, and I guess we'll just jump right into what happened this last weekend. BSU was off, and one of the series was Ferris State sweeping Augustana, so no points on the board there. Lake Superior State took 3 points away from Michigan Tech, and I think that's about the best you could hope for in that series because you don't want Lake Superior State to get too much of a cushion on you, even though they do have 3 more games played now, I believe, than Bemidji State, so you'll have plenty of opportunity to make that back up. But taking 3 points off the Huskies. So the Huskies currently sit 1 point behind you, and you're seeing less of this big disparity in games played other than Lake Superior State. Most teams have 16 games played. Ferris has 17 and Bowling Green has 14. So yeah, you're kind of seeing the standings come into shape here. And the bottom 3 are kind of the only 3 that have really separated themselves: Northern Michigan, Bowling Green, and Ferris State. But again, the standings are still so tight where Northern Michigan, they could be on home ice watch if they get a sweep over Bemidji State, that weekend. So like, that's how tight it still is. I think if you sweep Northern Michigan, you put yourself in a really, really good position to make a stretch run here and try to win the CCHA. If you split with them, you're still right there for home ice, but now you're nervous because now you're like thinking, okay, now we've got to come home and sweep Ferris State that next weekend, or we're in a load of trouble, So I really think you got to get as many points from that series as you can. In terms of rooting guides for this weekend, there's 3 series that don't include Bemidji State. 3 series played for points this weekend. Michigan Tech with a home and home with Northern Michigan. You are going to want Northern Michigan to take any points, like any and all points from that series. Even if it's 5-6, that would be great if Northern Michigan swept Michigan Tech, because then both of those teams would be 1 point behind you with 2 more games played, and that would be just fantastic for Bemidji State's chances to get home ice this year. So I think that's what you're rooting for there. The other series, Bowling Green and Ferris State, I don't really think we care what happens. I guess go ahead and split just so that we know that those teams can't, if Bowling Green sweeps, let's take a look at what that would do. If Bowling Green sweeps, they would have 16 games played and they would only be 3 points behind Bemidji State. So yeah, you probably want a split in that series, just in case Bowling Green decides to turn it on here at the end of the season and make a run at anything. Let's get a split there. Ferris State's playing a little better lately. They had that win against Bemidji State. Then they split. Oh, they got swept by Minnesota State, but then they took points off of Lake Superior State. They swept them, and then they swept Augustana. So they're all over the board too. And then the last series, and I think this is the biggest one you really just want to split in, is Minnesota State and St. Thomas. If they split, that's kind of best case scenario. Somebody's going to get points this weekend. If one of those teams gets 6 points, though, that's a really good head start because you're 3 points behind both of those teams with the same amount of games played. So if St. Thomas sweeps, I think that's better if St. Thomas is the team that sweeps, just because, like we said, they, as of right now, unless some miracle thing gets granted to them, some miracle waiver, they can't go to the NCAA tournament. So yeah, they would win the conference. Oh no, we would still have a better chance, to make the tournament if St. Thomas were to get that 1 seed,
Exactly.
So I think if anything, you want St. Thomas to sweep. If somebody's going to, you'd pick St. Thomas, but at the end of the day, you want 3 points. And I think it's a home and home. I'm going to check. It's a home and home. So, if both home teams want to win, maybe both road teams win so that the fan bases are just super depressed. That would be awesome. But
you want fan apathy. That's what we're going for. Yeah.
And Bemidji State, after these 3 weekends in a row of no, we've only had 1 conference weekend this past month because we had a week off, then we played Michigan Tech, and then we had a week off, and now we play a non-conference series. So we were the team that had more games played than anybody else, and now we're going to be back down at the bottom of that list again. So we'll be able to make up some ground. We have a decent schedule coming down the stretch. And cross your fingers. Hopefully everything gets a little healthier coming down the stretch. But yeah, Bemidji State not in a super bad position right now, especially for home ice. I think that they, we'll see what happens this weekend. If Michigan Tech sweeps and Minnesota State sweeps and Bowling Green sweeps, then I think you're okay, well, let's settle down here. But at the end of the day, BSU is going to have to win. Let's see how many games. Probably six wins in this last 8 games to have a chance to win the conference. And that
the regular season title you're talking
about. Yeah, the regular season title. That probably means you sweep Northern Michigan and Ferris State, and then at least you're splitting against St. Thomas and Minnesota State and hoping that they drop a bunch of points everywhere else. But yeah, Bemidji State's going to have to lock it in over these last now 10 games of the season. Augustana, go get some wins, make yourself feel a lot better about it, get some confidence up, get the health up, get some guys some minutes, and then I guess we'll see what happens when we get back.
Yeah, and there's a certain thing, and I know we've done a lot of talking about the scenarios and the situations, and ultimately, you mentioned it, Ian, it's going to come down to just, can Bemidji State hockey just get down and win these games? They've been able to win just enough to keep themselves towards that top in a very weird CCHA this year, but I know that they've been banged up. I know that they're trying to get healthy. And I know that this Augustana series isn't necessarily the great point to say this, but just start winning a little bit more of these games and to kind of grab hold of your own destiny, and don't be so reliant on some of these teams to kind of falter down the stretch. But Bemidji State, like you said, is a good opportunity, and they can take care of a lot of business. I'm not saying they got to win every game, but they can just start winning a lot more of these games and not dropping points here and not having a dud of a game there. They have a chance to grab the CCHA by the horns and end up being one of the top teams when the tournament starts. And it's going to come down to just them being able to put together a full 60 minutes and win some of these games. But they got a good opportunity to do it. Augustana is a good get right week to try and get back on the ice after a bye and get things squared away and let a couple of the guys rest up that they have to. And for the guys they have coming back from injury, at least it's you can kind of don't have to throw them fully into the fire. They can kind of get a reduced minutes on the ice and try and slowly work themselves back. But Ian, let's wrap up the show by talking about the fact that this is the 5-year anniversary of Hockey Day Minnesota 2019.
Yeah. And I was there. Did you end up making an appearance at that?
So I worked at the time in the athletics office as a media relations. So I was taking stats for basketball over the weekend, which stunk in the sense of, man, like this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. Some of the people who had to work hockey were there. Like I was always working basketball primarily, and I felt so bummed. And then I looked at the weather outside that weekend and I was like, you know what? I'm inside a gym that's 68 degrees. I think I'll stay inside.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's a once in a lifetime opportunity, not in the fact that Hockey Day Minnesota only like comes around every 20 years, but you were at Bemidji State when Hockey Day came to that city with the college hockey team there,
We previewed it on the radio. Remember?
We did. Yeah. My biggest regret from that weekend, as cold as it was, I think it was some weird like Thursday or Friday night. Well, Friday wouldn't have been weird, but I think it was a Thursday night game that they played Bemidji State outdoors against Michigan Tech.
Yep.
And
played it right on Lake Bemidji.
Well, in San Francisco parking lot, but basically, and it was so cold, dude. And I chickened out, and I regret it every day, especially because of the way that it ended with the Dylan Eichstad, Bemidji native, game-winning goal in overtime. Like,
couldn't write it any better. I
just wish that I would have sucked it up, went and bought some bibs or something, thrown them on, because that would have been just amazing. And I went to the whole day of hockey the next day on Saturday or whenever the actual event was. But yeah, it was almost just as cold. The only benefit was the sun was out that day.
Right.
But yeah, it was super fun. I envy War Road to have this crazy, like, I don't know what the temperature was up there, but yeah, just a nuts.
It was a negative 30 with wind. That's for
exactly.
Sure.
So yeah, just a nuts, great day for that. But yeah, that was super fun. I wish it would have been a little bit nicer of a weekend so that we could have like enjoyed it. Most of the time that you weren't watching the games, you were huddled around those massive fire pits that they built, or trying to get a spot in one of the tents to at least like get out of the wind or something. So that stunk that it was that cold. But it was still awesome for the city of Bemidji to get to host an event like that. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure that Bemidji will get it back someday, assuming that it continues to have a huge amount of success. Like, there's ultimately not that many cities in Minnesota that, like, I mean, there is, but like, 25 years from now, it could go back. You know what I mean? Like, it might end up there again, but it's going to be probably 20 years minimum before that would happen again. So, there's enough towns that are bidding for that. If little old War Road up on the butt crack of Canada can get a Hockey Day Minnesota, there's plenty of towns out there that can get it. And that's very disrespectful to War Road because obviously they have a massive hockey history and a hockey culture up there. So that's not me taking anything away from them. But yeah, no, that was super fun to be able to be a part of that. And I just wish it was like 20 degrees warmer.
Well, I think that was Bemidji's problem. I think it got so cold that it's like when the Super Bowl was in Minneapolis a few years ago, and it wasn't actually that cold compared to normal Minnesota winter, but it was cold. And I think the national media always like, oh yeah, it gets cold, but it'll be fine. And then they get there. And even though all the events are inside and they're rarely going anywhere outside anyways, they go, well, it's too cold to bring people back here. And then it's like, oh, you got to wait 30 years to build another new stadium. And then we'll come here for that. But I think Bemidji is the same way of like, they just by happenstance had the worst weekend possible with a polar vortex incoming. And it got so cold that everybody's just going to remember how cold it was in Bemidji, even though, like you said, they'll go all the way up to War Road. That I feel like will have an impact on getting it again. And like you said, there's a bid process and there's a lot of stuff and that goes into it. And I don't know how many times Bemidji has like put together a bid. All that stuff I don't know, but it was really fun. I hope the city of Bemidji gets it sooner rather than later so we can go up and do it. Because now that like we have the podcast capacity and I don't have to take stats for basketball anymore. Like it'd be a fun weekend to be able to do again. So city of Bemidji, if you want to put together a proposal, just know you have the full backing of the Beaver Banter podcast and we'll be at your disposal.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think that goes without saying, but yeah, I think the whole community would get behind it.
Right. So I don't know I know people who had been there and I asked them about it and they're like, I froze. And they're like, I remember seeing the Snapchat stories. I remember seeing the Instagram pictures. I remember seeing all of it. I remember talking to a few people who had to work the cameras and they were just like, it sucked. Like it was awful. Like some of the equipment didn't work all the time. Like it was cold and you did it solely for the fact of you just couldn't move this event. It had to be played at this time. And yeah, it wasn't maybe a great experience if you're just talking about people standing around, but that's still, it kind of adds to the lore a little bit.
Yeah, it really, like, you can't undersell the fact that it was that cold. Like it sucked so bad, man. Like it would have been a much more enjoyable experience. And it's like, yeah, you're going to enjoy it either way. Like, because it's hockey day, Minnesota, but like, God, if it wasn't like, if it was just a random hockey game played outside in the Sanford Center parking lot, it's like, dude, nobody would have been there. The parents would have said, hey, have fun today, kids. Like it sucked because you couldn't enjoy it in its fullest. And that was the most unfortunate thing about that day. And maybe that'll be a reason that, you know, if Bemidji tries to put another bid in 5-6 years from now, maybe that'll be another reason like, hey, give us another shot. We can put on a great event. We did it even when it was hell froze over. We can do it and hope to get a better weekend, you know, the next time. So maybe that'll help their bid in the future. I don't know.
What are the odds there's going to be another polar vortex that exact same weekend? Come on. There's got to. Exactly. So, all right, Ian, I think that wraps it up for Beaver Banter. Again, we're going to be gone next week. So there will be no show, but we will be back in 2 weeks, breaking everything down. So everybody enjoy the break, be good. And hopefully we got a lot of Beaver success to talk about since then. So we'll see you guys in 2 weeks.